Paul makes an interesting observation in that passage where he wants every believer to understand that he's not an anomaly. That when it comes to facing challenges because you're trying to do what is right, everybody faces those. He had challenges of all types and kinds because all he was trying to do was share the message of Jesus and trying to share a message of salvation and hope, and it created all kinds of conflicts and difficulties for him. And he gives us a pretty interesting warning when he says, by the way, everyone who chooses this path will also suffer similar kinds of challenges. And then he makes an interesting statement in verse 13. He kind of tells us why. He gives us an understanding of why it is that these imposters and these evildoers continue to create problems, because he makes the comment in verse 13, evil men and imposters will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. I'll tell you, I probably taught this text wrong at a period of time in my life. And not that it was wrong in the sense that it completely misleading and put people on a wrong path, but there was a time maybe when I read this passage and I thought to myself, well, what the writer's referring to is that evil just over time gets generally worse. That from the beginning of time to the end of time, that you'll just see this progression of evil, and it'll just continue to get worse and worse, and men will behave in bad ways, and they'll find even more devastating ways to behave in evil fashions as time continues. I don't know that that's really what he's saying. What I believe he's saying is that people who choose evil tend to just keep getting worse. And if they have no desire whatsoever to change, if they have no fiber within them to want to do something different, generally speaking, Paul says, they don't get better, they get worse. Evil men and imposters tend to just keep deceiving and lying and creating challenges and become more problematic over time. And when you think about that comment that Paul makes in that sense, how can I avoid that? When we look around our world, we talked about it a little bit in our Bible class this morning, and I didn't want to run too far into it because I knew I'd come back to it in the sermon this morning. But obviously our world sometimes is just a mess. And we sometimes we just kind of do this, right? You just wonder, what are people thinking? And how are they? And the problem, without being political, but the truth is, the problem is inconsistency. We permit in ourselves and those who align with us things that we despise in those that are opposed to us. We allow for and permit and accept behaviors and things among those who align themselves with us, and we say those behaviors are okay because they agree with us on these 6 issues. But those same behaviors done by somebody on the opposite side of some issue or thought does the very same thing, and all of a sudden now that's evil. And my friends, here's my point, that only multiplies evil. It allows evil to get worse and worse. When we never even consider that maybe I'm contributing to that I might actually, if I'm not paying attention and being watchful, I might actually be contributing to this problem, Paul says, that just keeps evil men moving forward in their evil pursuits. So, if we can understand a little bit about how that happens, maybe number one, we can avoid it in our own lives, and number two, maybe we can encourage some around us to reevaluate and think about how evil gets worse and worse, and maybe change the climate a little bit, one one person at a time. So how did this get started? Well, let's just go back. You've heard me talk about this text before. This is where sin got started, right? Evil began with Adam and Eve. Which you can't go any further back than that, right? Historically. Evil began with Adam and Eve and their first decision and choice to transgress the will and purposes of God and do what God had forbidden. Verse 9, chapter 3 of the book of Genesis. Then the Lord God called to Adam. This is after they've committed eating of that fruit. And he asked this question. He calls to Adam and he says to him, "Where are you?" So he said, "I heard your voice." This is Adam's response. "So I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself." And he said, God says, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you that you should not eat? Now it's interesting. Adam's kind of got this lack of accountability attitude about himself. You know, if you read the entirety of this, and we don't have time to go through it all, that his first instinct is to say, remember what he said, that woman, that I was great here in the garden by myself. Things were just great. And then that woman you gave me, that's his attitude. She caused me to do what you told me, and God, but notice who it is God's talking to here. He's coming down and dealing with Adam in this circumstance. But friends, this is where the origination happened. This is where all the problems, everything that is evil in our world today started in Genesis chapter 3 with Adam and Eve. The difficulty has been is there have been some men who've recognized their sinful, evil pursuits and make decisions to change, while others choose evil and just let it keep getting worse. So what do we learn maybe from this early scenario? So first of all, why did God ask this question or this series of questions? Doesn't God already know? Is Adam really hidden from God here? When the Lord calls and says, "Where are you?" Parents, have you ever called for your children and said, "Where are you?" and you know perfectly well where they are? Why do you call and ask that question? You call and ask the question because you want them to know. Right? You want them to understand that they are somewhere where they should not be. And you could just tell them that, or you could lead them to understand that on their own. Let me share a couple of extra texts with you. Go into Luke chapter 18. Luke chapter 18. And just notice some things that Jesus teaches. Jesus warned about what riches and the consequences of those riches can do to people. And you might think, well, how am I going to respond to God? How am I ever going to correct a situation where I'm not where I'm supposed to be? I'm not behaving like I'm supposed to behave. And here's how. Jesus' response to them was, the things which are impossible with men are possible with God. What's your point, preacher? My point is, friends, that you'll never change evil without God. It can't happen. It can't happen. Now, someone might argue, so you mean to tell me that an atheist person or an atheist society could never do anything morally redeeming? No, that's not what I said. What I said was you can't end evil without God. You can do some things that are right. You can behave in some ways that might fit a moral standard or code. But you cannot. It is impossible with men. but with God it becomes possible. We don't solve human ills with human wisdom. That's Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes. We don't solve our problems in this world by seeking men's ideas to resolve it. The answer has always been the Creator who put us here. And that's the message we need to be finding ways to share. There is an answer to why aren't men where they should be? Why are they not in the right places as they ought to be? Why is it that God has to? Well, number one, we're not looking to the right source. I'll talk more about that before we're done today. Jump back to 1 Timothy chapter 1. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 17. Just to reiterate the point. Now to the King, eternal, immortal, invisible, to God who alone is wise, be honor and glory forever. God knew where Adam was. He wants Adam to know and draw the right conclusion that he isn't behaving, acting in the manner in which he should. Nothing has eluded God here. He understands and knows all of it. Psalm 139, verse 7 through 10 illustrates the same basic point. That this isn't about God not understanding. This is about Adam not understanding that his relationship with God has been challenged because he hasn't turned to Him. The benefits of this conversation, where are you? Well, I was over here hiding because I was naked and afraid of you. The benefit of this question process isn't for God's understanding. This isn't so God can figure out what's been going on for Adam. These questions are about Adam. These questions are guiding and leading him. You take a quiz in school, and the quiz isn't about figuring out where the teacher is, right? The quiz is about figuring out where the student. They're not asking questions so they can learn. No, they're asking questions so we can evaluate where's the student. God's asking Adam questions not because God has some misunderstanding about Adam's situation. He's asking the questions so that Adam will begin to appreciate the challenges that he's brought to himself. And friends, point number one is that things get worse when we're not where we should be. When we're not in the right places where we ought to be. Go back to that text in Genesis chapter 3. And when he asked him, where are you? The idea here is to get Adam to understand that you're somewhere that you shouldn't be. We all sometimes probably find ourselves in that circumstance. We may even ask ourselves, what am I doing here? How did I get here? And I know I shouldn't be. I know I shouldn't be behaving in this way. I know I'm not in the right place. The question is, will I let evil just keep getting worse, or will I admit that I'm where I ought not be? Adam's response in verse 10 was, I'm hiding and scared. That's where I am. I heard your voice. Again, there's nothing like that moment of being caught, right? Eve eats of that fruit that had been forbidden of them. She offers to Adam, and he does eat. Now all of a sudden their eyes have been opened. They didn't even understand what nakedness was up until that point. And now all of a sudden, how did you know that, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. Why are you hiding and scared? You don't have to hide and be scared when you hear the voice of God unless you have chosen evil. Unless you've decided to do something or be somewhere or act in some way where you shouldn't be. Those are the reasons that fear and anxiety came to Adam. I'll give him benefit, by the way, here. I give him credit. At least he still can be moved. His conscience hasn't been seared. He hasn't allowed for evil to just keep getting worse and worse to the point where he doesn't care. You ever look into our world and wonder, do people not even care? Do they not even care how they're behaving openly? Do they not even care? They don't even try to hide, right? They don't even try to hide. They don't even try to put, they just, here it is. Why? Because evil, when unchecked, when unrepented of, when no one cares about what it's doing, gets worse. To the point where they aren't even like Adam. They don't even try to hide. That evil gets worse, and we even lose that sickening feeling. How many a child has gone scrambling when they were where they shouldn't be, and the voice of their parents is heard close by? At least that's a reaction. And maybe we ought to remind ourselves of that feeling and let the voice of God remind us and ask us, what are you doing there, Adam? But it gets worse when I'm comfortable in places and circumstances I shouldn't be in. My greatest fear for my own personal walk of faith is that I get numb to evil. I openly admit that. My fear for my own walk of faith is that I become so used to seeing, witnessing, watching, hearing evil that it doesn't bother me anymore. Because the minute it doesn't even bother my thinking or my conscience, the next thing I know, it might be me in a place where I shouldn't be. It'll be me in a circumstance where I shouldn't be because I'm so numb to evil. Friends, don't let evil get... It may happen in the hearts of some men. I can't control their choices. I can't control their decisions. I can't make those choices for them, though I may wish I could at times. But the evil gets worse when men become numb to the evil that's going on around them, and the next thing you know, I'm just comfortable with it as the next guy. Even though my behaviors might not be equal to theirs, I might not be conducting myself in the same way, but I'm just so used to it that I'm actually comfortable there. And so I've got to make some honest evaluations at times about where I am spiritually. Because evil will find a way to get worse and worse when this complacency, right, this level of comfort, even in sinful circumstances, begins to take root. I want you to run over to something in the book of Ecclesiastes for a minute. Just because I want you to think about it in light of our conversation. In verse 13 of chapter 12, he says, hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is man's all, or this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. I might as well be honest about my own spiritual behaviors and walk. I might as well be honest about what I think of evil and how I respond and react to it, I might as well be honest because God already knows. Right? We're already open to Him. And all of it, He says, will be brought before Him someday. We spoke about that a week or so ago. My responsibility is to fear God and keep His commandments, irregardless of the evil that might be going on around me. My job isn't to become numb to sin and evil. My responsibility is to build the kind of connectivity to the Creator that would keep me from that. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 17 that we become a new creature. I'm different. Christians behave differently as it relates to evil. We've got to embody this new life that God has given to us, this new man that we become as followers and believers in Jesus, because it allows for us then to behave accordingly and be honest about whether I've really given up the things of this world and the challenges that it presents. In Paul's second epistle to those in Corinth, 2 Corinthians chapter 13, he makes an interesting comment in verse 5. He said, "Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith." Sometimes maybe we think that's... Other people ought to be what... And I suppose there's a level of concern that all of us should have for each other. But at the end of the day, I'm accountable. Examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified? Examine. Be honest. Have I let evil begin to work in my heart, my mind? Am I becoming numb to those things? Have I become comfortable? Is it okay to be inconsistent when I accuse one man of behaving badly when I myself and those that I might align myself with behave in the same exact ways? An honest assessment will help me. God already knows the answer Himself, but He wants us to answer it for our own benefit. And so things get worse when I deny my own faults and inconsistencies. I'm not helping myself, nor am I helping the world get any better. When I live in complete denial about how my actions are parallel, if not equal to, exactly what others have said and done. But I convince myself that my cause or my idea is worthy of that inconsistency. And then we wonder, why is evil getting worse and worse? And partly because no one takes accountability for themselves. At times, no one. And it's real easy, right, to point and say, well, that guy is worse than me. Friend, the truth is, if you're looking for somebody worse than you, you'll find somebody. It might take some a little longer, right? It might take a little while longer for some to figure it out, but you could always point to somebody that's worse. But simply pointing to something that we deem as worse or more evil doesn't mean that I'm fine. Some real honesty needs to take place if evil's going to stop getting worse. The third question that was asked of Adam is, who told you this? Right? Adam's response, I was naked and afraid. Well, who told you that, God said? How'd you even know that? I didn't tell you. Right? There in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 11. I didn't inform you of those things. Up until then, we mentioned this earlier in Genesis chapter 2 verse 25, there was no knowledge of that. No understanding of those things prior to eating of that tree. But that loss of innocence, if you will, brought accountability. All of a sudden now Adam's accountable for his behaviors. Remember we talked earlier about why it wasn't me. She gave it to me and I ate it, but right. No one sometimes wants to ever take accountability for their own actions. And it's interesting because God said, well, who was it that informed you that you ought to go hide yourself? And friends, I want to encourage us to appreciate this morning that evil gets worse and worse when we listen to evil people. And we're taking advice and counsel from people who have no thought whatsoever to what God would say on the matter. And that's who I'm getting advice from? That's who's going to help me understand the difference between good and evil? That's who's going to help. No. God says that. Who informed you of the... How did you get this knowledge? How did you understand these things? And friends, sometimes we're listening to anything and everything that we should be listening to when it comes to these things. And we're letting the human worldly influences begin to guide and shape how we think about right and wrong and what's evil and what's not. Be careful who we're paying attention to, because it will allow for evil to get worse and worse. And then God says, did you do what I told you not to do? Did you eat of that tree that I told you not to eat of? At the end of verse 11. Again, God knew what they had done. He just wants them to see their own condition. Something caused your fear. Did you do something wrong? Have you stepped out of bounds? And we've made this thought already this morning, but I come back to it. The problem gets worse. Evil gets worse. Men get worse and worse when nobody's ever held accountable. And you know where that started with Adam? It started with him holding himself accountable. God raises these questions with him, and he's not... Notice God isn't asking Adam, what did your wife do? What has she done? What has she done? No. He's asking Adam, what did you do that caused you to hide in the garden? What did you do that would cause you to respond and react to my voice in the way that you have? Evil gets worse and worse when all we do is finger point. Notice I kept my hands in my pockets because I was afraid I'd point at you when I said it. Right? Have you ever seen anything in this world get better? No, you're worse. No, you're worse. No, you're worse. No, you're worse. Right? Personal accountability. That's how you stop the progression of evil. Personal accountability. And that personal accountability is to God first and foremost. That personal accountability is before the Creator of all things, first and foremost. Who was Adam accountable to? He was accountable to God. I told you not to eat of that tree, and you did it anyway, Adam. I gave you every other tree in the garden free to eat as you will. But the one I told you not to, that's the one you got in trouble for. And you're accountable for it. Will I be able to convince the world of that? Will I make myself miserable and vexation of heart and spirit and soul and create a lot of sorrow for myself if I lay awake at night trying to figure out how I'm going to convince the world to be personally accountable Solomon says yes. But here's what I do know. Evil will only get worse if I, at minimum, at least don't take my own personal accountability towards God seriously. If it can't start with me, how in the world would I want to begin to affect and change the hearts and thoughts of other men? If I've yet to even accept my own personal accountability, if I have yet to accept my own responsibilities, how would I ever even imagine that I'm going to influence the world to start behaving better when I haven't even accepted my own accountability for my own actions sometimes? Did you eat of that tree, Adam? Yeah, I did. First step. Yeah, that was me. Did you further this problem because you just pointing fingers in both directions? Yeah, I did that. Right? She told me to eat of it. God says, no, you ate of it. It only gets worse when no one ever accepts a personal accountability. And so we got choices to make. We've got some decisions to make. Do I want to resolve the problem of evil getting worse and worse? And if the answer to that is yes, then it starts here with my own choices, decisions, behaviors, and attitudes. Then maybe I can encourage others. Then maybe I can help others. And then maybe that circle can begin to expand. But if I never accept personal accountability, evil will always get worse. And that's what that whole conversation God has with Adam's about. Quit pointing at your wife. Quit pointing at that serpent. And look to your own choices, Adam. You did this. You did it. And nothing can get better until I'm willing to admit that. But you don't have to stay there. That's the beauty of the grace of Jesus that we sang about right before the sermon. The beauty of what Jesus does is He cleanses us and says, okay, you've made some pretty poor choices, some pretty bad decisions. I can forgive you of that. But once you've done that, then walk as the new creature. Walk as the new man you are in Christ. And live to avoid the consequences of the evil that continues to get worse and worse. How can we help you do that this morning? How can we help you step into those promises or return to them? Evil's been around since Genesis 3. It will continue to be around until God sends His Son. The question isn't about, will evil still be here? The question is, will I have become numb and comfortable and involved, allowing it to get worse, or will I turn and change?